Hello, Gamecock fans. I'm Spencer Ball.
And I'm JP Barry. Welcome to Ball Don't Lie, SGTV's premier live sports show.
And JP and I will be giving you our weekly insight every Friday.
This week on the show, a Super Bowl 59 recap, as well as our input on this year's Pro Football Hall of Fame inductees.
And later, updates on Gamecock baseball and college basketball.
Be sure to stick around for head-to-head pick'ems.
And without further ado, welcome to Ball Don't Lie.
Welcome to the Kennedy Greenhouse Studio.
If you are a person in the Carolinas with functioning legs and a football jersey, please report to Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte.
We watched Ice Bryce Young do his thing and lead the Panthers to their second win of the season.
I think Matthew McConaughey and Dabo Swinney are very similar. I feel like maybe one day McConaughey could play Dabo in a movie.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that love seeing Clemson lose.
This is just what football is about, man. Two teams that run the football, play defense.
That guy's Superman sometimes, dude. We've got to pick the Yankees, otherwise I'd be kicked out of my own family.
Yankees.
It's time. Is it time?
I think it's time.
This is Ball Don't Lie.
The Philadelphia Eagles dominated Kansas City on Sunday with a score of 40-22 in the Super Bowl. Spencer, it sucked. I mean, it was a bad game. I don't think there's any disputing that.
It really was, and you know, I picked the Chiefs, and I fully expected them to have like a gutsy, last-minute drive, because frankly, that's what they've been doing all year. The Eagles shut down the possibility of this being a close game. I mean, they just, from the word start, just laid a whooping on them. It was bad. And frankly, you got to give a ton of credit to the Eagles. A lot of people that have been getting, I would say, a fair amount of criticism throughout the year, not only Jalen Hurts, but also Nick Sirianni. I think you got to just give credit where credit's due, because Hurts, the Super Bowl MVP, was awesome in this game. Sirianni turned really the team around from their really slow start to the season at 2-2. And I think they both deserve a lot of credit, especially when they had a lot of criticism towards the start of the year, I would say.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of doubted the process with Nick Sirianni. They wanted him fired. And I think the biggest move the Eagles have made since they won their last Super Bowl was getting Vic Fangio, who left the Miami Dolphins to become the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. I mean, they battered the Chiefs without blitzing a single time, which I think is the most important stat I've ever seen. I mean, there was no room for, I would say there was no room for error. It was more like there was no room for success for the Kansas City offense. It was just nonstop.
And they didn't do themselves any favors, I don't think. I think in one of the first times in recent memory, Andy Reid was handily outcoached, and so was Steve Spagnuolo as well. But on the offensive side, when your offensive line can't block the front four the entire game, you don't bring over chip help from Travis Kelce, and when you do, he's not a very wholehearted blocker at his age. He wasn't really given full effort there, or at least that's what he appeared like. A little sluggish. Yeah, I don't know. Something seemed off.
I mean, he's old, man.
He is getting old.
It's like the 19th game of the season. And these seasons are so long now. It's like,
but they didn't do themselves any favors, as you were saying. But I mean, God, the Eagles, there's been a lot of talk about this being one of the best rosters ever. And honestly, I think they're onto something. This defense, it's ridiculous. And a lot of it has come from the draft. And so I think Howie Roseman deserves a ton of credit for finding these guys, if not signing them from free agency. Zach Bond went from a guy who didn't even play on the Saints to a guy who's probably a top 5 defensive player in the league now, like just seemingly overnight. So it's really a big credit to him and Fangio's system. But, I mean, it was a horrible game to watch.
Yeah, it was.
Really, unless you're an Eagles fan, which, big happy for them. I mean,
I guess
they got to see their team just destroy a team that really looked like they couldn't lose,
Yeah, they kept getting away with it,
The blocked field goals, the last-second drives, you were just like,
they didn't get away with it anymore. Speaking of get away with it, though, the NFL got away with it again with the Hall of Fame. This year's inductees into the Pro Football Hall of Fame have been revealed, and, well, they're interesting. I mean, guys who are pretty deserving, Jared Allen had been waiting a long time, Eric Allen. And then, you kind of, Antonio Gates.
I think Antonio Gates definitely deserved it. He's a top 5 tight end all time.
But then you start to muddy the waters with he kind of fell off there. And then you get to, I don't want to be anti-Gamecock here, but my God, what are we doing here, man?
The only thing that is confusing a little bit is the consistency of it all. Because, Sterling Sharp, obviously at the peak of his powers, had a great career.
Oh, yeah.
And it was,
he was...
very tragic that it was ended short, because he was really on trajectory to become one of the greatest wide receivers in NFL history. And just with that short of a career, you see a guy like him get in, but then in one of our snubs we'll talk about, a guy like Luke Kuechly, who had a longer career, arguably a more dominant career than Sterling Sharp, doesn't get it.
Yeah, there was never a point where Sterling Sharp was anywhere close to the value at his position that Luke Kuechly was. And then you get into, if you're letting him in before a lot of wide receivers who played a lot more. It's not Sterling, you feel bad, but it's like, Steve Smith Sr., should he have gotten a career-ending injury so he could have got sympathy points into the Hall of Fame?
It's not just Panther bias there as well. Torrey Holt's a guy that's been waiting forever.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison is in.
He did get in,
yeah.
but
it took him a while.
Torrey Holt's still not in.
And if he's not in, Isaac Bruce will never get in.
I think he's already in. But, those guys, you look right. We've highlighted 4 guys here. Torrey Holt, again, and Steve Smith are the receivers. And that's the part that doesn't make sense because frankly, they have the longevity, they have better numbers, and frankly, I think if their brother was Shannon Sharp, you might.
Or if they played for the Packers, which is a big part of it, because if you have that little G on your helmet, it's going to get you a long way.
It's just weird.
Steve Smith broke his leg, and the next season won the Triple Crown, one of the few times ever, and in an offense that would line up with 2 running backs and like a fullback, 2 tight ends. John Fox played 1980s football, and Steve Smith was still one of the best wide receivers ever, statistically, in that offense. And so, it's bizarre. Then you get into guys, I wasn't sure if I thought Eli Manning should be a first ballot. I love Eli Manning, love the Giants. But, apparently he wasn't even close, which is insane to me because, he played behind pretty bad teams the vast majority of his career. He had like 3 or 4 seasons with a good team.
I think you're also seeing that right now, how dysfunctional the Giants organization is.
Oh yeah, he kept them from becoming what they are now because they weren't any better when they had him, but they had him. And he was still throwing for 4,500 yards a season, 30 touchdowns.
Led arguably the 2 greatest postseason runs ever against 2 of the best postseason teams ever in the greatest dynasty ever.
Yeah.
You're talking about robbing the Patriots dynasty, stopping an undefeated season from happening, the first time that would have ever happened. This guy won arguably the 2 hardest Super Bowls ever. And every other quarterback except one that has won 2 Super Bowls is in the Hall of Fame.
And he was the MVP of both of them. And, people always say, oh, but the defense carried him. In 2007, the defense was the front 4 was amazing. You had Michael Strahan, Justin Tuck, O.C. Umenyiora, and all them. The front 4 was good. But other than that, it was a fine defense. They weren't bad, but they were just okay in the linebackers in the secondary.
And it still took Eli Manning heroics to get there. Yeah.
And then in 2011, their defense was terrible. They were one of the worst defenses in the league. The line was still good. You had Justin Tuck, Jason Pierre-Paul, guys like that. But, in that Super Bowl, a guy wearing 93 picked off Tom Brady playing linebacker. That's what the Giants' defense was then. And they had the 32nd best run attack. That season was all Eli Manning. And you look at who he was throwing to, rookie Victor Cruz, who was an undrafted free agent, Hakeem Nicks, who UNC Tar Heel legend. I love him. I have his signature on a water bottle somewhere back home.
That's sweet, dude.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
He dragged some people to all-time seasons.
In clutch performances.
Shane Vereen, the other Steve Smith, Reuben Randall, Will Tye, Larry Donnell. These are all guys who have close to 1,000 yards or more with Eli Manning at quarterback. And so you're just like, if he doesn't get in, what does that mean for guys who had better supporting casts but worse statistics and didn't win as much, like Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, even Drew Brees. Drew Brees has the stats.
He's going to be a Hall of Fame. He better be.
You'd think.
Because what I think, kind of touching up on our final points here, I think the big thing is the inconsistency because it's, Jared Allen finally gets in, but Terrell Suggs doesn't get in, who has like 30 more sacks than him. And, that part's a little weird. You look at Luke Kuechly, Sterling Sharp gets in on a short career. Luke Kuechly retires to protect his brain from becoming mush.
He would have died on the field.
And was also the best linebacker in the league for the 8 years that he played. He leads about every statistic imaginable in linebackers that were active during that time. Steve Smith and Torrey Holt both have better stats than Sterling Sharp, yet they don't get in. You just wonder, what is the criteria then? If the numbers don't count, it doesn't make sense, frankly. And that's I think the problem that a lot of fans are having. There's problems across Hall of Fames in all sports. Ichiro somehow wasn't unanimous.
We shouldn't get started on the baseball.
We should. We'll never stop talking, but we are going to talk about baseball, aren't we?
Yes, we are. As we move on to college sports, Gamecock baseball starts the season today at 4 p.m. The college baseball season got underway about maybe an hour ago up north, but it's coming down south to here. Gamecock baseball looking to bounce back from what was a very underwhelming season.
Yeah, and really from the year before in 2023, you come like one game short of going to the College World Series. You lose the Super Regional to Florida. Last year, it was just, again, another tale of kind of a Mark Kingston team that couldn't quite win the regional, couldn't escape, but in theory, you had a lot of talent to do so. And speaking of Mark Kingston, he was fired. They brought in veteran head coach Paul Maneri, one of the only coaches to have won a College World Series. And, Ray Tanner, in his last act as athletic director, pretty much brought him off the couch.
He was, one last gasp. He was like, Paul, come to Carolina. Because Paul Maneri's won everywhere he's been. He was at Air Force, he was at Notre Dame, he was at LSU, and now he's here. And really, it just goes back to great coaches keep their team playing at a high level throughout the whole season, which is something we never saw with Mark Kingston. We saw glimpses of it. Remember when Paul Skeens and LSU came to town? Carolina blitzed.
Got battered.
Yeah, Carolina battered them. We were what, like number 1, number 2 in the country?
Number 1.
And then fell off a cliff after that. Then bounced back, got to the Super Regional, fell just short of Hurst and Waldrop in that he had like 20 strikeouts against Carolina.
And then that was the Florida team that was the national runner-up that year. So, you're this close. Kingston could never get it done, but Maneri's a guy that has done it.
Yeah, he got it done with LSU that season. He's the one who, the video of Ethan Petrie hitting that home run off Paul Skeens. All the nerds were like, you see Paul Skeens' fastball can't go at the major league level. And then you see, hey, that's our guy. That's Ethan Petrie. That's the reason people think Paul Skeens is going to suck. But, that just speaks to the talent.
That's really dumb.
Oh, yeah, no. They were immediately proven wrong because Paul Skeens is a monster. But an even bigger monster's lurking at Founders Park waiting to strike today.
That's right. Here's the pitching rotation for their 3-game series against the mighty Sacred Heart.
The other SHU.
That's right. It's Dylan Eskew getting the start today at 4. Matthew Becker, the lefty, Saturday at 2. And Jake McCoy, another lefty, gets the Sunday start. So not a couple new names. Jake McCoy's really the guy that's gotten that promotion to the starter role, as well as we saw Becker out of the pen more last year. So both of those guys going to be tasked with, a heavier innings rotation. But for South Carolina, you're honoring one of your greatest baseball figures. The field's being named after Ray Tanner on Saturday. And really, it's a chance to start on the right foot under a new regime. What do you think this season's going to hold for them?
Well, it really comes down to, can the pitching hold up? Because the lineup's going to mash. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Founders Park is a great place to get the ball up and out of there. And, they took a tough blow. Eli Jersenbeck, he's out for the foreseeable future with a stress fracture in his elbow.
Was probably going to take one of those starting spots.
He has the talent to be a Friday night starter. But that's just where South Carolina has really kind of struggled. They just haven't had that ace that's going to go out there and give you 6-7 innings of 0 to 2 runs every week. They've had guys they can give you that one week and then it'll fall off the rails the other.
And another thing we saw in that 2023 season where the Gamecocks were really good, when things started to fall apart, it was injuries. It was guys like Will McGillis who was out. and we saw him return to the lineup and be an immediate spark. But whenever they lose guys, it's hard to fill those shoes. So I think that's going to be important, getting, not just the starters involved. Guys like Will Tippett were coming off the bench last year, putting up really big numbers. He's probably going to be in a starting rotation this year in the infield. I made it seem like he was a pitcher. He's not a pitcher, but in the starting lineup this year. So there's going to be a lot of guys that have to step up, but of course, offensively, it's got to start with Ethan Petrie, a career 341 average, 44 homers, tied for 5th in Gamecock history. And he's on the preseason Golden Spikes Award, preseason All-SEC first team. The guy is projected to mash the ball, and frankly, he has proven that that's exactly what he does.
I think the only debate here is when he's going to break the Gamecock home run record, and not if. Because, I mean, like you said, the man just hits home runs. And, Sacred Heart, a good team from a year ago. But
35 and 23, pretty solid.
It'll be interesting to see how much they lost from that season. Because, the price for success of a young program or a smaller school is to lose all your players and coaches and whatnot. So we'll see what happens there. But we're going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We've got college basketball coming up right after the break.
And in men's college basketball, number 1 Auburn and number 2 Alabama will square off for the first ever 1-versus-2 matchup in SEC history. It's been a historic season for the SEC. There are talks of 3 teams getting a 1 seed. Heck, maybe a 4th if other teams fall off a little bit. But, I mean, this is a historically great football matchup. JP, we're seeing it at new heights on the court.
Yeah, it's been building for a while. These teams have been really good. They're only SEC teams to make a Final Four in the last decade. And, they've just kept building. Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl, 2 very different coaches. Nate Oates, kind of the new kid on the block. He's really kind of risen up with this high pace, all threes action. And then Bruce Pearl's kind of the elder statesman. He's been around the block. And he's a program rebuilder. And as you can
a fiery presence for sure in the locker room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, well, for Auburn, I mean, it comes down to Johni Broome. I mean, they lost to Florida on Saturday. We talked about that matchup last week on the show. And it was really just that they didn't shoot very well. If I look right here, they were, it was really not close the entire game.
7 for 22 from 3.
And then they were 15 of 23 from the free throw line. That's something you just can't afford to do. Broome just couldn't really get comfortable, and no one else really stepped up. So, I mean, it really starts and ends with Johni Broome in these big-time games because, I mean, look at his stats. He's averaging 18 and 11 with 3 blocks and 3 assists. They bounced back during the week with a nice road victory in a very tough place to play there, Spencer.
They sure did. Let's actually see who they beat, JP. I completely forgot.
The Vanderbilt Common with their weird little raised arena.
Vandy's actually had a very solid year in the SEC, first-year head coach.
Oh, yeah.
They've really bounced back. But, again, I think for Auburn, it really starts with Broome. Of course, he's, I think, still the favorite to win National Player of the Year. It's kind of him versus
it's
Cooper
gonna be
Flagg.
him. Yeah. Although Eric Dixon from Villanova, he's the only reason Kyle Neptune still has a job.
That's right. He's been great. But Johni Broome, of course, it starts with him, but the team really has to shoot well around him. That's what we saw against Florida, whereas really as good as Broome plays, it's got to be a team effort, as, that's the way basketball works. But the guard crew around him, Baker Mazzara, Pettiford, they've really got to get the shot to fall, especially in a tough place to play like Alabama.
Yeah, and the big thing, if they don't, they just got to secure the offensive glass on the defensive side of things. That's something that they've really struggled with. They gave up, I believe, 17 offensive rebounds to the Florida Gators. You can't afford to do that against a really good offense like that. You can't afford to do it against Alabama, who scored 90 or more points in 12 of their games this year. As we'll take a look at the Crimson Tide, led by one of the best guards in college basketball in Mark Sears, as well as the transfer forward Grant Nelson from North Dakota. Spencer, tell me a little bit about Alabama.
Yeah, so again, it's the same Nate Oates style that we've seen, again, under his reign. They're 21-3 on the season, again, all the way up to number 2. A lot of people thought they were deserving of the first place spot. They're on a 7-game win streak. And again, it's all about this tempo. They get out, they run the floor, they shoot threes. They'd rather shoot threes than about anything else. And everyone on the floor can shoot the three. I think that's what makes them really dangerous, because Grant Nelson, he's a really, really big guy. He's not afraid to stretch the floor, shoot threes. He leads the team in rebounds and blocks. He's kind of their defensive anchor and kind of matches up pretty well against Janai Broom, I would say.
Yeah, this will be one of the best matchups I think we've seen in college basketball. The big thing is that, when Alabama does go inside the paint or inside the arc, they're going to make it. They shoot nearly 61% from two because it's only layups. They don't shoot mid-range jump shots. That's what we saw. I mean, when Brandon Miller got to the NBA, people were like, he's a mid-range game? It's like, well, Nate Oates probably had him under, the threat of annihilation if he didn't take a layup or a three. But, I mean, dude, this will be just one of the best games of the entire season. I personally can't wait. But for teams that maybe haven't punched their ticket like Alabama and Auburn have yet, we're going back to our roots with a little bit of the return of Bubble Watch here, Spencer. And who else better to start it off than a team that we talked about earlier in the season for being disappointed.
We've willed them to greatness, JP.
Yes, we have.
We talked about how horrid Kansas State was, and they haven't lost since then, picking up huge wins. I mean, just a road win at Iowa State, wins at home versus Kansas and Arizona, and frankly, looking dominant while doing it, JP.
Absolutely. I mean, the Arizona win was wire to wire. The Kansas win, they kind of controlled it the whole way. They've been the best team in the country, according to Bart Torvik, over this 6-game win streak. They have a winning record in conference play, and a conference that hasn't been as respected this year. I feel like people are a little bit down on the Big 12. But, Kansas State, I think what's really holding them back right now from being closer to the field, they don't really have any great out-of-conference wins. Their out-of-conference schedule kind of sucked. But, there's still plenty of quad one opportunities. Their next two, BYU and Utah. So right now projections have them, they're not dead like people thought they were, but they're closing in.
One thing about Kansas State, though, is they have a really easy end. They've got kind of the bottom half of the Big 12, and I know they have one. They might have Iowa State one more time before the season closes.
But it will be at home.
I know they. That's right. I know they have one more good Big 12 team. I can't quite recall. But other than that, I mean, they've got BYU, Utah, the UCFs, Colorado. Yeah. So they have a really good chance. And if they win out,
I mean, if they end the season with 18, 19 wins, I think
like
it'll be hard.
A 12-game win streak.
Yeah.
Right now, in their last 6, their defensive rating before these games, somewhere in the 90s. I think they're all the way up to 4th. I saw yesterday in their last 6. I mean, they are playing out of their minds, and just it's such a random turnaround because this team looked dead in the water, and all of a sudden we talk about them right here on Ball Don't Lie, and
it's the BDL effect.
And it's the reverse curse.
We talked about David and Gessen when we first talked about Kansas State, but got to give credit to Coleman Hawkins, who's turned his season around. He's averaging 12 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 1.5 blocks per game. He leads Kansas State in steals and blocks. The big-time transfer really starting to turn it on, and the team's starting to win. I don't think that's a big coincidence.
Spencer. Him and Doug McDaniel have also been scoring the ball a lot better. And frankly, the team as a whole is just shooting the ball a lot better than they were when they were losing. And really, they have a lot of momentum, and that's what you need on Bubble Watch. Kind of a team that's in the opposite swing of them is the Texas Longhorns. They've recently fallen down in the standings. And a team that looked like they were definitely going to be in the tournament, JP, it looks like their hopes are kind of fading here.
Yeah, they started 11-2. They had some great out-of-conference wins against Syracuse, St. Joe's, on the road against NC State. But, man, I mean, they just have fallen off a cliff in SEC play. They're 4-8 in conference play, bringing them to a 15-10 record. Just 3-8 versus quad ones. And man, when they lose big. They got blown out by Alabama. They got blown out, I think, by Mizzou. And they're still in the field right now, but they're like an 11 seed, last 4 in type at the moment. Trey Johnson's doing all he can, scoring nearly 20 a game, shooting nearly 40% from 3, as well as Arthur Kaluma, who's still playing.
The K-State transfer,
yeah. Former Creighton transfer. But Spencer, I mean, not only are they going to have a chance for a big-time resume booster, they're also going to have a chance against the worst team in the SEC, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Trey Johnson is going to have a big game. They've got Kentucky at home. That would be a big quad one win that they desperately need at this time. Kind of a resume staple. I think that would immediately be their best win on the season. And that's really what this team needs. They need a win. And then also, it is a good opportunity to streak something together. The Mighty Gamecocks this year are kind of easy pickings for the rest of the SEC. But I tell you what, a loss to South Carolina would be about good as dead. You talk about being on the edge of the tournament. They see you've lost to the previously winless Gamecocks in the SEC. I mean, that's just a gunshot wound to
and
your
that's an
tournament
awesome
case.
motivating factor for a South Carolina team that's kind of experiencing a lost season right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many teams in the SEC still in position to make the
somebody
dance.
out.
Yeah, I mean, if you could just punch up above your weight a little bit and knock some of these teams around, I mean, you'll help out a lot of people, including some mid-majors like our last team of the day, the San Francisco Dons of the West Coast Conference. One of my favorite teams in the country. They suffered a tough loss last night on the road to Gonzaga, but they were in it the whole way. They scheduled like madmen in the non-conference, Spencer. They have wins against Boise State and Loyola Chicago, and their losses in the non-conference were to Memphis and Clemson, two great ranked teams, and then also the 20-6 Bradley Braves on the road.
In the Memphis game, they only lost by 4. They were really in it the entire game, and frankly, that's kind of been the tail of the tape with the Dons. I mean, they're in about every game. You know, Gonzaga beat them by 11, but really came down to the wire, I would say.
Yeah, they pulled away a little bit. I mean, I had to stay up late and watch the end of that game to make this graphic. The game ended around 1.
A real trooper.
But they're just a fun, gritty team. They're led by Marcus Williams, their point guard, who averages 19.5 points per game, 2 steals. Then they have, Malik Williams, and then Marcus Williams, their other point guard, who averages 5 assists per game. So it really starts with their guard play. And, you know,
it's the only 2 guys on the team in double figures.
Yeah.
They do a lot of the heavy lifting, but the supporting cast, I mean, it's just everyone chips in, and the Dons, that's just kind of how they play. You know, you've got 2 guys that can create.
It's gritty mid-major basketball, man. You got
It's
your
a lot
one,
of fun.
you got your one big-time scorer, you got another like supplemental guy, and then you just got a lot of guys who just pitch in, man.
Yeah, and it's Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and them in the West Coast Conference. That's real
Santa Clara,
hoops,
you know,
man.
but Santa Clara's
Santa
been good,
Clara,
but then they also have Wazoo and Oregon State. Because they're in there right now as they transition from the Pac-12 to the Pac-12, but with the new Pac-12. That's why I've loved this conference so much this season, because it's like this kind of weird zombie thing where like there's really like 6 pretty good teams that are really fun to watch. And the thing for San Francisco, much like Kansas State, they've got a good schedule, like a much manageable schedule the rest of the way, but they have a home date with Gonzaga at the very end of the season. If they can win out and defeat Gonzaga at home, I mean,
That's a great win.
I mean, Gonzaga really, they're not as secure in the field as some might think as well. They might end up on bubble watch if they drop a game or 2 more, because they have to play Santa Clara, St. Mary's, and San Francisco. Again, they already lost to Santa Clara and St. Mary's, and they have to go on the road to San Francisco. So this Gonzaga team, they got to watch out.
I know the ratings do still like them, but again, we're going to stay in basketball, hop over to the women's side of things, and we've got a huge clash. College game days coming to Columbia. It's UConn and South Carolina this Sunday. What more would you like? But let's take a look at the Huskies to start this off here. And again, for them, it's, you know, they're the same old dogs. The Huskies, they never die in women's basketball. Starting off with Paige Beckers, she does a lot for this team.
Yeah, she does. I mean, she's been around the block. She's suffered a lot of injuries, but she just keeps getting better. Nearly 19 points a game, a very efficient score, but it's her defense that's so key to her as a player. And she's averaging over 2 steals a game. And Spencer, it's just really something that you don't expect out of someone who's had, 2 ACL tears, and she's still defending at a high level.
And it's really awesome to see just her work effort on the court. I mean, she'll die on the court, man, diving for loose balls. It's just the hustle factor is really there, but they've got a true freshman that pairs with her extremely well. It's Sarah Strong, who kind of is their new anchor. You know, they lost to Leah Edwards, who had been a real staple for this team. But Sarah Strong is filling that role really excellently. I mean, averaging 16 points per game, 8 boards, 1.5 blocks, almost 60% from the field. She's been really impressive this year, and you know, it's those 2, but again, a great supporting cast. We've got AZ Fudd, who dropped 34 last night, 2 nights ago against St. John's. It's a really good team.
Yeah, they're very well-rounded. And, I mean, they're UConn. They're going to be here. And this is something I think women's basketball does really well. with these big-time non-conference matchups late in the season. Of course, we're going to get one here late in February on the men's side with Duke and Illinois at Madison Square Garden, which should be a real fun one. But, this South Carolina-UConn game late in the year has been something really special to kind of watch it unfold. I'm very excited. As we now look at the Gamecocks, they're 23-2, with their only 2 losses being to 2 of the top 3 teams in the nation, UCLA and Texas, on the road. And they just keep taking care of business, man. I mean, they blow out pretty much everyone they play, including the last time they played UConn.
Yeah, I mean, again, you see it right there. It's a 4-game win streak over the Huskies. I don't even remember their home game win streak, but I don't think they've lost since 2020 to NC State, and that's when fans couldn't really even be there because of COVID. So, again, this team just wins. They win wherever they go. Again, only 2 losses on the season. They didn't lose at all last year. Of course, it's a dominant program. You know that. We know that. But Joyce Edwards, the true freshman, how good is she?
I mean, she is really – she's one of those players that the talent stood out immediately, and now everything else is starting to come along, and she's getting a real feel for the game at a high level in her freshman season. And in conference play, she's putting up stat lines like this, 28 points on 10 of 17 shooting. And you just love to see stuff like that because that means a lot when you get into these big-time games. I mean, this is an opportunity for your star-studded freshman to really kind of show out.
It really is, and a thing that I think will actually help this South Carolina team is these tough losses on the road. It sounds weird, but that Texas game came down to the wire. That felt like an NCAA tournament game, and that's exactly what you need. You need this experience for your true freshman, Joyce Edwards. You've got a lot of other young contributors who have got to figure out how to recoup from losses, how to, hit the film, discover what went wrong, and that's how you get better. And frankly, that's what they're going to have to do to take care of business against UConn. But that's not our only headlining matchup for women's basketball.
No, it isn't. As following up Sunday's action between the Gamecocks and the Huskies, there's a big-time showdown up in South Bend on Monday as number 13 Duke travels to face off number 2 Notre Dame. Notre Dame moving up to take that spot left by South Carolina. But Spencer, I mean, this has been one of the kind of premier matchups in the ACC the last several years as Duke has really come up as of late.
Yeah, they've been a really good program. We saw South Carolina took care of Duke, I believe, earlier in the year. But again, it's been a team that's been frequently in the top 25. On the road in South Bend is a very tough place to play, but Duke's had their number. They've won last 3 or 4. JP, what's it going to take for Notre Dame to get over the hump against the Blue Devils?
Well, it'll start with the big 3. I mean, it's like King Ghidorah on the court here for the game, or for not the Gamecocks. Finally, we're talking about somebody else, but no, for Notre Dame, Sanaya Citron, Olivia Miles, and Hannah Hidalgo, 3 guards. It's a 3-guard lineup. You're like, is that really going to work out very well? Well, it has.
It's a 3-headed dragon.
Yeah, they're first in 3-point percentage, 4th in adjusted offensive efficiency. And you just look at it. The stats speak for themselves. Hannah Hidalgo, 25 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, over 4 steals per game. Then Olivia Miles, 17 points, 5.5 rebounds, over 6 assists per game. And Citron came back from injury, shooting nearly 40% from 3.
They're just hoopers, man.
They really are. I mean, you blink and they go up by 30. I mean, we saw it the other week when they played Stanford, and it was a close game early on, and then boom, it was like 74-23, and it was like, oh my God, what happened?
And I love how this team turns defense into offense. You mentioned Hannah Hidalgo averaging over 4 steals a game, but again, once they get the ball away from you, they're going to go down and just splash a 3 and right in your face, and that's just. And the best part, and what I love about South Carolina women's basketball is, you might have a premier player, but everybody on the court, they can give you work at any time. And Notre Dame is really following that same thing because it doesn't have to be Hannah Hidalgo. Olivia Miles and Sonia Citron are both, projected top 10 picks in the WNBA draft. This whole lineup can just go.
And they just show up in big-time games. I mean, that stat on the UConn graphic, their 3 losses are all to ranked teams by a combined 17 points. Well, 11 of those came when they played Notre Dame. I mean, they beat Texas by 10. They went on the road and blew out Southern Cal. Southern Cal, I think they're one of 2 losses on the entire season for them. They just show up in these big-time games, and it's really, of course they do. They have a great defense. They got Maddie Westbeld back from injury, who's been a key part of their defense. Man, they're top 30 in like almost every offensive stat, Spencer. What is Duke going to have to do to kind of counteract that on the road?
You know, on the road is really the tough part. You think about how good this team is, you would love to have them at home, but for Duke, it's all about their defense. Again, they hold opponents to 29% from three, number 5 in adjusted defense, and that's what they're gonna have to do. If you want to force Notre Dame to take tough shots, tough threes, keep this as low scoring as possible, really a gritty, grinded out game, that's what you love, but I think it's gonna be really hard. But again, what is Duke going to do on the offensive end? Who are the key people to look out for?
Well, it starts with the true freshman, the big-time recruit. Cooper Flagg is getting all the love at Duke right now, but they have another true freshman in Toby Fournier, who's been outstanding this year. She's one of the few women's college basketball players right now that can dunk, and she's an 18-year-old from Canada.
All of her high school clips were, blowing up last year, seeing where's she going. And it was Duke getting the huge recruit there, and she's been great for this squad.
She has, and then Ashlyn Jackson, kind of the opposite end. She's been there for a while. She's 42% from three, and she's kind of been the engineer behind this resurgent Duke program on their third straight 20-win season since they hired their head coach from the Boston Celtics, and that's kind of funny because Niall Ivey was also in the NBA when she was hired to be the head coach at Notre Dame. But the thing for Duke is the advanced metrics like them a lot more than the AP poll does. So I think this might be a little bit of a closer game than it seems on paper. But, man, it's just the number 1 versus number 3. In the ACC, you have NC State just kind of sandwiched in there, as well as Louisville, who's been resurgent this year. But, I mean, this is kind of the biggest game, I think, in the ACC the rest of the season.
That's right. And it's going to be a great weekend and Monday for sports and women's basketball specifically. But that's really all we've got for you today. We'll be right back after the break with this week's Pick'ems to wrap up yet another episode of Ball Don't Lie.
Welcome back to BDL Pick'ems, and I'm closing the gap a little bit after a strong week with a 19-16 record, while Spencer's sitting there at 20-14. We're going to 21-14. Sorry, it was cut off a little bit on the prompter from my angle. That's my fault. We're going to go through the games now.
It's the blinding sun, JP.
Also,
just
that's true.
That.
That's why I wear glasses. We're going to start with women's basketball, and what else but number 7 UConn at number 4 South Carolina. Spencer, who do you got?
I'm going to go with the Gamecocks again. I think, bar none, South Carolina is the toughest place to play in the country. Again, it's been 4 years since somebody has beaten the Gamecocks at home. Maybe 4 or 5. I know it's the 2020 season, so I don't know. I don't remember if that happened in the fall or the spring. But I tell you what, I don't think it's going to matter. I think UConn is a really good team, but I think South Carolina at home, it's a much safer bet. And really, this team, they jump out to leads at home. Yeah. And once you get this crowd going, it's a problem.
And they're having to, they're making people park at the football stadium to get bussed over to the basketball arena for this game. That's how big this is. I'm taking South Carolina as well. UConn's very good. They have struggled on the road in their losses, and I think this is just a perfect storm for South Carolina. Kind of bounce back from a weekend where they were kind of humiliated by Texas in the fact that they typically just don't even lose.
And I think, humiliated by a 4-point loss is really like you're okay with that because Texas is a team that's going to make a deep tournament run. They're a really good squad. Could see them again. And frankly, for South Carolina, I just think they're going to use it as fuel.
Yep, and we'll move on now to number 13 Duke on the road against number 2 Notre Dame. Spencer, who do you got?
I'm going to go with the home team again. I think Notre Dame just has a little bit too much. I think playing in another really good environment in South Bend is going to play to their advantage. Hidalgo, Miles, Citron. I think they're too much for Duke, but I do think this is going to be a good ACC game.
Yeah, I think the matchup to watch, of course, is going to be Toby Fournier down low on defense when Hannah Hidalgo or Olivia Miles drive to the rim. That's a big part of their game, and if she can kind of control that and make Notre Dame jack up a bunch of threes, Duke's really good at limiting opponents from three, and if Notre Dame can't catch fire, this could get into kind of the slow rock fight Duke wants it to be. Unfortunately, you don't want to get into a fight with the Fighting Irish, and I think Notre Dame gets a big win at home against Duke. And then for our final women's basketball matchup, it's the number 6 Southern Cal Trojans who just took down number 1 UCLA last night, hosting number 22 Michigan State. Spencer, who do you got?
There's a trend here. I'm going to go with the home teams, but also Southern Cal, you come off probably the best win of the women's basketball season. Somebody finally beat UCLA. They took them down. I think they're going to continue their hot stretch and they're going to beat Michigan State at home. Juju Watkins is, again, one of the best players in the country, and I think this team just has too much.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick against them after they just beat number 1 at home. I don't think there'll be any
foolish.
I don't think there'll be any letdown there. I think Southern Cal takes it home.
Moving on to the men's side of things, but sticking in the Big Ten, it's number 16 Wisconsin headed to number 7 Purdue. Who you got, JP?
I've been whiffling and waffling on this one. You know, Mackey hasn't quite been the
Whiffling and waffling over
Yeah,
here.
it hasn't quite been the impenetrable arena that it typically has been, but Purdue has been playing really well recently. And Wisconsin kind of streaking on the road. We saw it when they lost to UCLA, saw it when they lost to Illinois. I think Purdue gets it done at home.
Yeah, Braden Smith is one of my favorite players in the country.
Yeah, wow.
He is awesome, and I think he's just going to lead the Boilermakers to a win, and that's just what he does. It's just an awesome guy to watch.
Yeah.
Moving on, it's number 6 Houston headed to number 13 Arizona, a really tough place to play. But who do you think comes out on top?
You know, Arizona's trying to bounce back from that loss to Kansas State. Meanwhile, Houston's really rocking and rolling there as they're looking to compete for a number 1 seed in this NCAA tournament. We have the NCAA seed reveal this upcoming Sunday, actually, which will be interesting to see. We'll cover that on Ball on the Line next week. A little preview there. But I think I'm going to go with Houston on the road. I just don't know if Caleb Love's going to be able to catch fire against the Cougar defense.
And that's really the whole bet with Arizona. You're like, man, are they just going to shoot, 50% from 3 and beat anybody in the country? Maybe, but I think I'm going to take the Cougars as well. I think they're one of the hottest teams in the country. Really, nobody is playing better than they are right now, except maybe Kansas State. But I'm going to go with the Cougars, even though it's on the road. Moving on, it's the heavyweight matchup we've waited for. 1 versus 2. Number 1 Auburn in Tuscaloosa against number 2 Bama. JP, who you got in this? The Iron Ball.
Yeah. Auburn hasn't won in Tuscaloosa in 3 years in men's basketball. And, I think that streak ends. I think Janai Broome and Auburn, they get it going. They start out hot on offense. And really, Alabama, they're not equipped defensively to shut teams down as well as they are to get it going on offense. I think this is going to be a high-scoring matchup. It's going to be up and down the floor, up and down the floor. But I think Auburn has enough talent on defense where they can win a few possessions. That's what it's going to come to. Can you win a few possessions, get stops, get a bucket to go up by 4 or 5? So get a stop, get a bucket to go up by 7. Then hold on as Alabama hits a couple threes. That's what Auburn's going to have to do, and I think they can do it on the road.
I'm actually going to change my pick. I was also going to go with Auburn, but the more I think about it, Tuscaloosa, really good basketball arena. I gotta give them a lot of credit.
The fans
Alabama,
are right there on the players.
They really are, and that's something I think is going to prove crucial to this game. These two schools hate each other.
Oh, yeah.
I think Alabama gets it done at home.
Under on Chad Baker-Mazara technical / flagrant fouls instead of 1.5.
I might go with the over, man. I mean, this is a game that does usually get chippy. It's whether it's a couple fans getting removed, a couple players, maybe even Bruce Pearl and Nate Oates get tossed. It wouldn't surprise me a bit. I'm going to go with the Tide at home. I think Mark Sears has a big game, and we've kind of been waiting for him to have an explosive performance. Staying in the SEC, moving to another in-state rivalry. It's number 22 Mississippi State at number 19 Ole Miss. Who you got in this battle for the Mississippis, JP?
I really love the Egg Bowl, and I can't get away from my feeling that Mississippi State just really sucks, man. They don't shoot the ball well. They don't beat good teams. They're just there. And you know what? Ole Miss, I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win big. They've started to get more production out of their transfers like Dre Davis lately, and I think they're getting hot at the right time.
I'm going to go with number 22 Mississippi State. Again, I don't love either of these teams, really, especially come tournament time. They're good. They're like a blanket good, but
the most 7 seed you've ever seen in your life.
They don't have the best wins. Ole Miss, I believe, took down Bama a couple weeks ago.
And that was, that'll keep them alive.
But for Mississippi State, they slow the game down for better or for worse. But they usually get into these slow, the rock fights we talked about earlier. They really played a slow pace. They might keep the other team in games, but they keep themselves in games. I think, this is going to be like a low 60 scoring game. I think that favors the Bulldogs. I think they get a tough win on the road against their arch rivals. Moving on, it's a Big East matchup. Number 24, Creighton, who's really hot, at number 9, St. John's, who just fell to Villanova.
Yeah, this is number 1 in the Big East on the line at Madison Square Garden. Creighton just got humbled a little bit by defending national champion UConn. St. John's, same deal on the road against Villanova. So both teams are going to be hungry, looking for something to prove. And I'm not betting against a Rick Pitino team with something to prove. Give me the Johnnies at home.
Especially at home. Again, this St. John's team, you take a Villanova team that's been really, spotty, but they can really, they're a good team when they're playing good.
When Kyle Neptune gets out of the way and Wooga Poplar and Eric Dixon get to play, I mean, it's criminal that this team won't make the tournament.
Yeah, and
but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, it definitely circle that in your headlines for this offseason. But I think St. John's wins it at home, even though Creighton has been trending upwards as of late. Moving back to the Big Ten, going full circle, it's number 7 Purdue again at number 11 Michigan State. Is this next Wednesday, I believe?
It's something. It's next week, maybe Monday.
Yeah, check your calendars, but sometime next week. It's a really good Big Ten matchup.
It is, and did you think I was going to pick Purdue once and not do it again? I'm going Boilermaker all the way.
Oh, Boiler Ball.
And I think that Braden Smith has a habit for playing really well against Michigan State. Michigan State kind of hasn't shown up in these big games. They really struggled down low, and I think Purdue's going to have a really nice day.
Next Tuesday, actually. Thank you, Tyler. I knew it was sometime next week. But I'm going to go with the Spartans at home. Tom Izzo, awesome. Great for the sport of basketball, an awesome guy. And he's really getting a lot out of his players right now. I mean, these guys...
Yeah, they're not the most talented team.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Coming into the year, you were like, it was hard to place them in the Big Ten. You're like, I don't exactly know what to expect. But you know what? I think this Michigan State team is the best one we've seen in a while. I think they get a big win at home, and they're still in contention to win the Big Ten. I think this is one step closer to them maybe achieving that. But we're going to head back to the Diamond, right down the road at Founders Park. Sacred Heart at South Carolina. We're not going to pick individual games here. We're going to pick a series winner. JP, first of the year, it's opening day. Baseball's back. The sun's shining. Do you hear the birds? I
hear the birds, and the birds are speaking to me, and they're like, South Carolina's going to win.
It's a rooster call.
Hey, they come to snuff the rooster, but they can't. I think Sacred Heart goes back home a little bit. They'll feel good about themselves, but I think South Carolina, they're just too talented.
I completely agree. I think South Carolina wins this series. Ideally, you want to break the brooms out against Sacred Heart. You'd love to start the season 3-0, feeling good as you work into your Winthrops. They've got Queens coming up soon.
We really don't have a good out-of-conference schedule.
And we
played Clemson, and then
haven't the whole time since we've been here. Really,
we got Texas one time, but that was like over spring break, so nobody could even go.
Yeah, a bit weird, but I think baseball's going to start on the right foot. And I tell you what, that's going to do it for this episode of Ball Don't Lie. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at SGTV at USC.
To keep up with all of our content, be sure to also visit us online at sgtv@usc.com. For SGTV, I'm JP Barry.
And I'm Spencer Ball. Happy Valentine's Day. And from all of us here at SGTV, have a great weekend, Carolina.
Forever to thee.
Bah, humbug.